companies had a fascinating response to President Donald Trump, who asked executives in said oil companies if they have any interest in returning to Venezuela once Nicolás Maduro is ousted in a regime change war. And so far, the answer is a hard no. That's what Politico is reporting, and I am super shocked by that. Cenk, what are your 2 cents?
Yeah, it's definitely surprising because Venezuela appeared to be picked first because it has the largest oil reserve in the world, and we almost always attack countries with large oil reserves. But I think that I have a different theory on why we're going there, and it might surprise you. So let's find out why it might not be the oil companies, and then talk about why we might be going to war with Venezuela anyway.
So the answer that Trump received, which I'm sure he didn't like, from these oil industry executives is likely due to the current oil markets, right? The fact that the oil supply has been increased, which means more supply, prices come down. So the US benchmark oil price was around $56 a barrel as of Wednesday afternoon. And that's actually the lowest it's been since January of 2021. Here in California, we're not feeling the relief because they tax the crap out of gas here, and we're still paying like at least $4.50 a gallon if you're lucky. But anyway, this has given Trump some wiggle room to attack Venezuela without too much concern about oil prices being impacted to a point where things are unaffordable. So he's like, all right, I got some wiggle room. But the increased supply is also having the opposite effect on these oil companies. Those prices are also way too low to entice companies to take the risk of pouring huge investments into the crumbling Venezuelan oil facilities that former strongman Hugo Chavez seized decades ago, industry officials and analysts said. And I want to just quickly correct something that I said on the show yesterday. Trump said something about how Venezuela stole our oil, and I'm like, what? What does he even mean by that? I think he's referring to what Chavez had done under his leadership. And so US oil companies have better investment options elsewhere, according to one person who's familiar with the discussions. And then 2 people familiar with Trump's efforts say that the administration has only recently started initiating the outreach to the industry. It's not as straightforward to convince companies to risk capital in an uncertain political environment, one of those people said. Now, I've got more details on Trump's conversations with these oil executives. So for instance, Evanon Romero, who is a former executive at the Venezuelan state-owned oil company known as Petróleos de Venezuela, now works as a consultant in Houston and is actually part of this opposition effort against Maduro, right? So in late November, the Trump administration met with Exxon, ConocoPhillips, and representatives of the Venezuelan opposition group to which Romero belongs, although he wasn't at this particular meeting. The meeting was led by the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, and the discussion centered on the possibility of the 2 oil majors returning to Venezuela, right? Now, Romero said Exxon and ConocoPhillips aired concerns about the debt they are owed from their past Venezuela operations. And the Venezuela representatives floated the opportunity to take control of additional fields to compensate for the debt. So what does that mean? So US oil companies were actually operating in Venezuela. Chevron still does. Chevron has some sort of deal with Venezuela, and apparently they're happy with it. It's working out for them. But other oil companies were also operating out of Venezuela previously. This is like in the early 2000s when Hugo Chavez suddenly decided to force them to give majority stakes of their projects to the Petróleos de Venezuela, to the state essentially. He wanted to nationalize the oil. So Venezuela ended up seizing the assets of companies that resisted, and that's the debt that these oil companies are referring to. Now again, Chevron has been the sole major oil company to continue working in Venezuela, operating under a special license to produce oil in the country and then export it to the United States. But Romero said that Wright, again, Wright's the energy secretary, encouraged the companies quote, to get an understanding and solve their outstanding problems along the way, end quote. But made clear, this is an important part of the story, made clear the Trump administration would like to see more Venezuelan crude flowing to US refineries. I thought that was an interesting part of the story because Trump very recently trashed the oil in Venezuela. It's like, it's nasty oil. We don't want that oil. It's like, is it though? Finally, Romero says, we need those barrels. That's an important message from the government. So,
yeah. So a couple thoughts on this. So first off, the oil companies oftentimes get outrageous deals with these countries. Why? Because they threaten to have America invade them if they don't. So that has a long history. In the 1950s, we deposed the leader of Iran because he wanted the Iranian people to have a larger share of the oil profits. And so the oil companies forced Britain and America to get rid of them. And that's what eventually led to the Ayatollah. So it's possible that Hugo Chavez was saying, yeah, but it's our oil and we're paying you way too much. And the Venezuelan people should keep more of it. Now, if they had a previous deal and they should honor that deal, okay, fine, right? But in terms of a country deciding what to do with its own natural resources, that's not theft. No, you taking their natural resources at the point of a gun at lower prices is theft. So I got no love for Hugo Chavez, but that is very far from theft when you actually control your own natural resources. In terms of the oil companies, they've got two different conflicting things here. One is sometimes oil prices are so low that it's not worth drilling anywhere, let alone riskier places, right? And risk could be for a number of different reasons, including what type of oil it is, and that makes it more expensive to drill in those places, right? But when you start a war with an oil-rich country, usually because of that instability, oil prices go up. So I'm still surprised that they wouldn't want it. But apparently, if this story is to be believed, and I can see why they wouldn't, right? For the reasons that I just gave you, there are many circumstances in which it might not be profitable for them. Right. Well, then we've got to pick a new reason why we're going to war with Venezuela if that's not it.
Don't forget, Noble Mobile saving you a ton of money. So a lot of people are signing up now and beginning to realize, what the hell, why am I paying so much to Verizon and AT&T? So your bill's only $50 a month, but it can actually be less because they give you money back if you don't use your data. So if you're paying more than $50, there's no reason to not switch. It's crazy not to switch because same phone, same number, same contacts, literally nothing changes. TYT.com/switch, TYT.com/switch. All right, we'll be right back.
Right, and I genuinely do think that for someone like Marco Rubio, a Cuban American, it's deeply ideological. Cubans are not organized the way Zionists are. So, but honestly, the Cuban refugees who came here in the late 50s are just as zealous as the Zionists are about their own political project. So I do think it's ideological for Marco Rubio. And for Trump, obviously, he personally is motivated by the oil. But I don't begrudge the oil executives for actually being smart and remembering, hey, Venezuela burned us before. Are we really gonna take that risk again? So we'll see how this plays out. But I am curious if these meetings and these discussions maybe motivated Trump to avoid talking about going to war with Venezuela during his address to the nation.
Yeah, Anna, from my point of view, look, normally this would be mainly about the oil. Now this is the second big clue we've had that it might not be in this case. We shared a previous story before about it as well. So that, and it's usually a confluence of factors that leads to a dramatically wrong decision like this. And defense contractors always get rich from war, of course. Israel apparently has an interest in this because they claim Venezuela and Hezbollah and Hamas are working on drones together, so they want them destroyed and smashed to pieces. Is that a large factor? Probably, just because of the overwhelming power they have. But my best guess is this is driven by Rubio. And you're right, Anna. If there's any second group in the country that's as zealous as the pro-Israel folks, it's the Cubans.
Yeah.
And you can't talk them out of it, and anything but annihilating the Cuban government is unacceptable to them. Anything other than that, right?
And I disagree with them wholeheartedly on this. I don't think that the US should be dragged into a war with Venezuela in order to eventually lead to the toppling of, the communist regime in Cuba. I think that's ridiculous. It doesn't mean I hate Cubans. In fact, I have quite a lot of admiration for Cubans. So just keep that in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so easy, right? Anna's husband's Cuban, and we all have Cuban friends. Who would hate Cubans? What a weird thing to be, right? But does that mean we have to agree with them that we need to go topple the Venezuelan government so we can topple the Cuban government? And if we don't agree, are we anti-Cuban? No, of course not. The only ones who use that trick are the Israelis.
Exactly.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.